Well, good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I'm Luke Reynolds. We're going to start the webinar here in just a couple minutes. We're going to give folks a few minutes to join us, and then we'll get underway. And while we're waiting, we'd love to hear where everyone's joining us from. So feel free to drop in the chat where you're joining us from, and if you're at your desk or out in the field or at a job site, we'd love to know where everyone's coming from. And thank you for being here. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started here. And again, good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. My name is Luke Reynolds. I'm the Associate Director of Government and Public Affairs for the Irrigation Association. It's a real privilege to be joining you all during Smart Irrigation Month. We've had a tremendously successful campaign this year celebrating the people, processes, and technology that really drive the industry forward. And we've been really successful in communicating that to the broader public. So we thank everyone for being here this morning. I'm very excited to be joined by Eric Santos, and we're expecting Rick Hall to join us at some point during the webinar today. We're going to talk a little bit about what smart irrigation is, some practical applications, and really just have a great conversation. So just a little bit of housekeeping. We encourage you to use the chat today. It is open to everyone. We're going to have a Q&A session toward the end of today's webinar, but if you have questions as they come up, feel free to drop them in the chat. And if it's appropriate, I might jump in and cut our presenters off and have a little bit of an off-the-cuff conversation. So again, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to go off camera. I'm going to let Eric Santos introduce himself, tell you a little bit about his life and irrigation, and we'll get started. So thank you again. And Eric, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Luke. And thank you everyone for joining today. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today as part of Smart Irrigation Month, and really appreciate the opportunity that the I is giving us to gain CEUs. We all understand how valuable those are. So I'll go ahead and start off the presentation. So let's see, Luke, if you can go ahead and advance to my section. My perspective is primarily coming from the large commercial municipal site. So I'd been in the industry since 1994. Went to school, have a degree in agricultural engineering, and come from a family that focused on the ag side of irrigation. My grandfather was a ditch tender. So growing up, I just always had a tremendous admiration for what my grandfather did and the hard work that he put in. And at a very young age, always thought surface irrigation is a very inefficient way to irrigate. But realized it took a lot of experience and a lot of practice on his part to be very efficient, to make that method of irrigation very efficient. So for me, growing up, there was a very early on passion for irrigation. And then after graduation, started pursuing all the IA certifications. So I have all the certifications on the landscape side and one of the ag certifications as well. So I mean, those IA certifications are some of the most rigorous certifications in the industry. So it's from my perspective, those certifications carry a lot of weight. So let me go ahead and jump into what I'm going to talk about today, and would like to share with you my perspective in working for over 30 years. 29 of those years were spent working as a um, vice president of irrigation services for a large commercial landscape contractor, national contractor. So I have quite a bit of experience working in different parts of the country. But over the last several years, my focus has been working at a company called Epic Irrigation, where we do irrigation training, water management services, just more of the specialized focus around irrigation efficient practices and water management. So I'm based out of Northern California. Typically, most of my work now is in Northern California, but do have quite amount of experience working outside that area. So when I start to think about site assessments and technology selection for large commercial and municipal projects, from my perspective, before we start turning on water and looking at things like sprinkler coverage and valves and controllers, you really need to have a good understanding of the site's water use and system capacity. Um, a lot of irrigation professionals tend to look at sites on a controller by controller basis. They'll start at a controller and then start looking at the valves on each controller. But I always think it's a good idea to get a good understanding of the site's water supply for the site before you start. Is it a site that has multiple POCs feeding into a common main line with multiple controllers drawing off of it? Or is it a site with a single POC that has multiple controllers that have to share all the water off of that POC? In my mind, as I start to assess a site and I think about the benefits that a smart controller is going to provide, excuse me, the ability for excuse me, the ability for a smart controller to adjust its schedule on a daily basis according to weather conditions is really just one half of the benefit of a smart controller. For me, the second benefit comes from the flow sensing side of it. So if I have a site that is supplied by, let's say, a single 2-inch point of connection with a moderately sized main line, with 7 or maybe 10 controllers drawing water off of that single main line, the smart controllers that I have to choose from to recommend to my customer that are available on the market really start to narrow down. So systems that can handle those complex scenarios where you have multiple controllers sharing flow. So when I look at a project, I immediately ask, does it have flow sensing? And if it doesn't, what will it take to add flow sensing? Ultimately, for me, flow sensing is just as important, if not more important, than um, having a system that's going to adjust its schedule based on weather changes. Um, I've been on projects where we've had a catastrophic mainline break at the end of the season where flow wasn't being utilized, and the water loss negated all of the water savings that the customer's smart controllers had produced up to that point in the season. And it's pretty depressing when you see that. So sometimes you'll have a client that will do a project in phases and they may say, well, this year we're going to do all the controllers and down the road we'll go ahead and we'll add flow sensing. From my experience, I always try to urge customers to integrate flow sensing with that smart controller because it really helps you manage water much more effectively. So once you have a good understanding of your water source, your mainline size and available pressure, then you can start diving into your controllers, looking at connectivity options, cabinet configurations, coverage, uniformity, operating pressures, and hydrozoning and things like that. And typically when you're doing a site assessment, you're often going to find a half a dozen of the same issues over and over and over as you start going through all your zones. And just one last thing I forgot to mention in regards to understanding your water source that I forgot to mention is that it's just not important to understand the size and number of POCs. It's also important to understand the type of water and water quality that you have. The use of recycled water has become more and more common over the last 20 years. Or maybe your site has a well, or maybe you're drawing water from a pond with a pump, and maybe you have capacity limitations. It's always going to be important to step back and understand from a very high level your source, your water quality, and your reliability of that source before you really start diving in to your site assessments. Because those are all things that are going to impact the smart and high efficiency products that you're going to recommend that are best suited for that site. I mean, not sites aren't all the same. Every site is unique. So it's having that good understanding before you jump in. All right. Next slide, please.
Hey, Eric, before we go on to the next thing, we actually got a question here from Mike Dwyer, and I think it might be a good moment just to take a pause and answer it. He asked, one flow sensor with multiple controllers. How do you accomplish that? You wanna answer that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's a few offerings that are available on the market where you have controllers that have the ability to monitor flow in the cloud. If we go way back, Rainbird Maxicom was really, really good at doing that, but you had to have a CCU and a computer on site to do that. Um, I think a lot of manufacturers, if they don't have that ability on the roadmap today, it's something that they're planning to release in their smart controller offering. But your limitations really start to narrow. There's maybe like 3 products on the market today when it comes to smart controllers where those controllers actually communicate with each other as they're operating. So if you do have a high flow scenario, um, there's a term seek and see. So seek is basically what the controllers do is they go through a process of trying to identify which controller and which zone is the offending valve. So yeah, the offering and the solutions available for that today are limited, but I know a lot of manufacturers have future plans to integrate that kind of technology in the future. So great question. Thank you. All right, now let's talk about controller strategies across multiple zones or sites. And cloud-based technology has really given us the ability to manage water in a much more efficient manner. Gosh, when I started 30 years ago, even 20 years ago, if you wanted to turn on water, you had to walk to that controller, turn some dials or press some buttons to toggle through a bunch of screens. Now it's so much easier. We can just walk through a site, up to a site with our phone in our hand, and we pop open an app and we can start running water. Some manufacturers even have apps that actually show you the valve's current flow rate as that zone is running. And I know more and more manufacturers are working on things like having the ability to show you the valve's amp draw in real time as you're running that zone. So technology, not only has it come a long way, there's a lot of technology on coming up here in the near future. And I really do thank manufacturers for really pushing the industry. And I think manufacturers have really pushed things maybe a little bit further and faster than definitely than contractors have been ready for. But you've seen adoption and maybe implementation on the regulatory side by municipalities and agencies kind of mandating that a lot of this technology be utilized. So I definitely tell people, irrigation is one of those things where there's always something new. It's never a dull moment. And it's the one part of the landscape and turf industry that is advancing extremely quickly. I mean, there's always new products, new changes, new updates. So for me, I know the IA show is really one of the best ways to network and find out about those products and those updates. Just a really great opportunity. Um, So for me, my approach is when I take on a site is to try to get that system as dialed in as much as possible to where it's adjusting automatically, but it's not watering excessively. So if I'm setting up a new site in the spring and it really doesn't matter whose system it is. That's the other thing is you really need to be well versed in different products and not just focused on one product. But if I'm setting up a system in the spring, I'm going to start off by adjusting my smart controller settings on the conservative side. And as the days start getting longer and the temperatures start getting warmer, I'm going to start to make slight changes to put water down only where it's absolutely needed. So before I increase water, I always go to zone, turn on the zone, review the coverage. If I can, I try to keep my controller settings on the conservative side. I'll leave things where they're at and try to make any necessarily sprinkler or nozzle adjustments so I'm improving the coverage as opposed to increasing the watering time. I always tell people that whenever you go to a controller and you change the settings to where that controller is going to put down more water, it's no different than going to an ATM and making a withdrawal with the customer's ATM card. It may take 30 to 60 days, but eventually those increases are going to be seen. Customers are going to see those on their water bill. So during spring, I try to do these weekly site visits. And as it gets warmer and further into the season, I might do site visits twice a week or 3 times a week when it's really hot. When I do a site visit, I typically show up with a tablet where I'm connected to the cloud where I can make those adjustments to my smart controllers there on the spot. Kind of the old way is I used to walk around with a notepad or a clipboard, and then I'd go to each controller and update those changes, or maybe I'd go back to the office at the end of the day. But sometimes I get caught up and I wouldn't have time to make those changes. But now with cloud connectivity, it's just, I mean, it's so much more efficient. So as I go from spring, summer, and fall, I'll start to carry a moisture probe with me in the fall just to do soil probes and just to ensure that my run times on my smart controller aren't excessive. In the spring and in the summer, it's really easy to tell if you need to make those adjustments, but in the fall, it's a little bit harder to tell if your smart controller is doing what it's supposed to. So that's why I tend to do more probing in the fall. Also, a probe is going to help to ensure that you're not misdiagnosing any dry areas that might be caused by things like dull mower blades or lack of fertility or maybe disease or fungus issues. A lot of times, just because we start to see stress, we automatically think, hey, it needs more water. But we want to make sure we don't fall into the trap of misdiagnosing those issues. And if you have flow sensing on a site, hopefully you can look at the water usage on a weekly basis to make sure your usage is following the same trend as the weather. So overall, a smart controller is just going to be a tool to make you be more efficient. If you're still going, if you have a site with the smart controller, you're still going to have to do site visits and wet checks because the smart controller, even if it has a flow sensor, isn't going to tell you if you have a rotor that's out of adjustment and it's spraying out into the street. But when you do those site visits, a smart controller is going to make you much more productive and much more efficient. All right, next slide. All right, moving on to communication with clients and stakeholders. For me, there's really 3 things that come to mind here. My first recommendation is to try to listen to a customer's pain points and frustrations and try to understand what the customer's motivation is. Are they dealing with high water costs or high water bills? Are they dealing with regulatory issues? Or maybe it's something simple like customers tired of having stuck valves, or maybe they're tired of having overspray onto windows that they have to wash every other week. Every customer has a pain point, and what I might think is important to me may not be important at all to the customer. So it's really, really important that you listen to them and try to come up with solutions to solve their problems. Um, my second recommendation is I like to give customers options and explain the pros and cons and price points for any technology or high efficiency equipment that I'm recommending. At the end of the day, what the customer is buying and what I install in the ground is going to be there for many years to come. So, from my experience, when I give the clients options, I frame it up as here's a good option, here's a better option, and here's the best option. And when I make recommendations, I try to stick with products. I tend to stick with products that I know are going to be reliable. But after reliability, I try to select products that I know I'm going to have good manufacturer support from. So if something does go wrong, I want to work with a manufacturer that provides good support to help me rectify those issues. And finally, the last thing I take into consideration when providing options for my customers is price point. Because at some point in the conversation, I know the customer is going to start thinking about ROI or payback period. So it's just bound to come up. So you want to be prepared on that side. When you look at the cost of what you're recommending, always know what the cost of water is in that area. Because if the customer's not paying for water, maybe they're just paying for electrical fees on their pump. Those are all things that you're going to have to think about. And then my third recommendation is to try to simplify complex technology. And I try not to think about it as communicating with the customer. I try to think of it as educating the customer. And I try to keep things as simple as possible. I try to avoid using words like evapotranspiration rate with clients, and I try to stick with words like either smart or weather-based controller. I try to avoid the word distribution uniformity, and I try to stick with efficiency. I try to avoid the word precipitation rate and stick with application rate because I know those are just terms that I really want to avoid throwing out terms that are going to lose the customer in my process of trying to educate the customer because I know if I lose them, they may go down a completely different path and assume something that maybe you didn't necessarily say because they misunderstood you, and then you end up with an unhappy or dissatisfied customer. So really, really important to try to keep things as simple as possible. Um, all right, next slide. All right, so Luke asked me to go ahead and share a case study, and I've had a lot of experience over the years working on different sites and really large sites, but this is one that I've been working on pretty recently. Um, it just seems to me that I have worked with some large municipalities in the past, but over the past 5 years, a lot of homeowners associations have been reaching out. So it just seems like there's a need. A lot of municipalities tend to have some very, very advanced systems, and those staff members are highly trained in how to utilize those systems. But when it comes to large commercial projects, we find that maybe the people operating those commercial projects at sites like HOAs maybe don't have that level of education that the municipalities do. So a current project that I'm working on this year, it's a large HOA community in Northern California. Not the largest by far, not the largest that I've worked on, but this client had installed 10 smart controllers on their project a few years back. And when they started looking at their water usage, they found that their water usage from month to month was all over the place. There were some years where it was incredibly low across the entire year, and some years where the usage doubled or tripled. Um, so there really wasn't a consistent pattern in usage. Now, we spoke about customer pain points earlier. This customer's pain point was that their water rates had tripled over the past 2 years. They live in a city that the city had to shut down their wells and start importing water because the city had discovered that PFAS or forever chemical levels in their wells had exceeded the new PFAS limitation levels that were set forth by the EPA. So the city had no choice but to increase water rates, and the increase was very significant and it was very sudden, way more than what the customer had budgeted for. So this site was somewhat complex when it came to flow. The site has four 2-inch water meters that feed into a common mainline loop. And each POC had a normally closed master valve. So each normally closed master valve was connected to um, 4 of the 10 controllers. So you had to have everything synchronized to make sure that as your smart controllers were adjusting their schedule, that master valve on one of those 4 controllers had to be open. And you always wanted those 4 to be open at the same time, or else you wouldn't have enough pressure on the site. Because for a site with over 260 valves, uh, the pressure limitations start to become a concern. So what the customer is really hoping for was usage that reflected your typical bell-shaped curve during the irrigation season, where usage gradually starts increasing March, April, and then it peaks in July, and then it gradually starts to decrease towards the end of the season. But what they were getting were sudden huge spikes in April, and then sudden drops, and then huge spikes again. So for this site, the first step was resolving some hardware issues that they had with their controller, and then setting up proper programming, and ensuring that their smart controllers were, excuse me, the sensors on their smart controllers were actually in the correct locations. Oftentimes you'll see contractors go in and that sensor is going to go in the easiest location. Shoot, there's even sometimes where we see a rain sensor get installed in a zone where it's getting irrigated on, and then the contractor bypasses that sensor because it's always triggering. So that's super, super important. The second step here was to enter virtual flow rates because flow sensing wasn't something that the customer had thought about very early on. So we went through the system and recorded the flows using the water meters on every single valve. And then we took that data and we went ahead and entered it into the controller. So then we had the ability to start running weekly water use reports and really stay on top of our consumption. Once the client started seeing consistent water usage and they weren't in for any surprises with these huge spikes in water, they took that money and they used it to start upgrading to pressure regulated heads, pressure regulated spray bodies with rotating nozzles in all the front yards of the homes. Now, this site's located in California, so California passed a law about a year and a half ago where it bans the potable use of water to irrigate non-functional turf. So this customer is now going through the process of identifying these areas of non-functional turf, and they just have these expansive green belts that one irrigation cycle costs them like $2,000 to irrigate. So they're going through these green belts and trying to identify when they do have to comply with California's regulation. It's called AB 1572. When they have to comply, what are going to be the turf areas that they're going to convert over to low water use shrubs with low volume irrigation. So yeah, that wraps it up for my section. Luke, I don't know if you want to go ahead and turn it over to Rick, or maybe we jump into the next section.
Yeah, thanks for that, Eric. And I'm not sure that Rick's been able to join us. So we'll go ahead and just keep moving right along. And let's talk about some practical applications to an extent, some lesson learned. Um, you know, I was gonna ask you for the top 5 system killers and how to fix them, but let's start with 3, if you can think of
All right.
3 system killers that you run into kind of regularly or have run into, and then your solutions.
Yeah, that's a great question because everybody tends to have a different perspective. One thing that is, and again, I mean, sometimes I see things that at the end of the day, I'm like so depressed that manufacturers and agencies have gone along so far in advancing, but contractors really haven't caught up. But one of the things that I, I I see where customers invested in smart control technology and just hasn't achieved the savings that they expected. For me, maybe the top one is accepting the defaults that are in smart controllers. And that usually comes down to where you're selecting the type of plant and maybe the precip rate for that type of irrigation. So there's some manufacturers where you select type of sprinkler, there's a drop down, and your choices are spray head or rotor. Well, behind those, there's going to be a precip rate. So it's really, really important that if you're programming a smart controller, that you understand what the numerical value is behind that. And there's things like soil type. Oftentimes I'll see systems might default to sand as being the soil type, and the contractor just doesn't take the time to go ahead and change those. So that's probably the biggest thing that I see. The second biggest thing I see is here in California, there's a model water efficient landscape ordinance that new sites have to comply with. And one of the requirements in there is that the site have, it's a large site, it needs to have a flow sensor, it needs to have a master valve. Um, Oftentimes I'll find that maybe the flow sensor isn't properly sized. So, I mean, manufacturers have really done a great job at coming up with um, flow sensors that are capable, ultrasonic flow sensors that are capable of reading very low flows. So you might have a drip zone that reads 2 gallons per minute or 3 gallons a minute. Your typical paddle style flow sensor on a 2-inch main line is going to have a really hard time reading that accurately. So just making sure that the site was designed with the proper flow sensor. Um, and then another one where I see actually contractors will tend to turn flow sensing off is when there's some systems where you set your thresholds based on a percentage. And the percentage isn't based on the flow rate of the valve. So if I set a smart controller up to trigger when flow exceeds 20%. So that seems to make sense. You know, if you're telling me, okay, if my flow rate exceeds 20%, to shut the system down or shut the valve down and turn on the next valve. 20% sounds reasonable, but when you start to think about it, 20% on a valve that has a flow rate of 50 gallons a minute is, what is that, 10 gallons a minute. So that makes sense. So if I have a 50-gallon per minute valve that reaches 60, and even that might be a little bit high, I'm going to want the system to shut down. But if we look at the low side of the spectrum, if I have a valve that is flowing like 2 gallons a minute, if I have my threshold set to 20%, um, what is it? That's 2.4 gallons a minute. That's going to be really tight. So when I see contractors accept those settings on low flow valves specifically, they end up getting a lot of false alarms. And then what happens? Like I know the next step is they're tired of seeing all the false alarms, so they'll go into the controller and they deactivate the flow sensing. So that's a little frustrating. But
Let me pause you right
boy, I
there.
could go on and on.
Yeah, well, we got a great question. Just absolutely worked out perfectly there from James. He said, "How close do you think a zone alarm should be programmed to expected flow before it faults?" And you gave a few examples there, but is there a specific sort of ratio, or do you have kind of the Eric Santos formula for success, or what? How do you manage that?
Yeah, I actually have a chart, and maybe I can send that over to you. I don't have it on this computer that I'm on right now, but it's I wouldn't say it's what I use, but it's what I sit down and I share with the client. Because flow sensing can be really tricky. You might have, let's say, a nozzle breaks off of a pressure regulated pop-up, and you have a geyser, and um, your flow has increased by maybe 4 gallons a minute or maybe 5 gallons a minute. That's something that I'm sure the customer wants to catch. But if you're on a site that has pressure fluctuations, just fluctuations and changes in pressure are going to cause changes in flow rates as well. So even though I do have a guideline, it is really important that um, you sit down with the customer and you explain to the customer, this is why we're setting up these thresholds. Because I've had a customer where on low flow valves, I've set the threshold to like 50%, and the customer has seen that and has, they basically blew their mind when they saw and started asking, why do you have that flow threshold set so high? So for me, it's an education process, but there are two manufacturers that actually handle flow in that way where you can go through and instead of setting a blanket threshold, the thresholds are set according to GPM on a zone. So I think that's a very smart and innovative way to, I guess, keep contractors from just turning flow sensing off because it's not working.
Yeah, it's a great response, and thanks to James for that question. And just a reminder, everyone's welcome to drop questions into the Q&A. And we've got another one from Scott Warnick here that I'll get to in just a second. But I want to ask you a question, Eric. It seems to me that you have made a few comments, and it sounds like you're spending a lot of time doing education with your clients. So I'd be curious to know, whenever you're having these conversations, is part of the time spent with them kind of in a way an expression of the value that you provide? And what are some of the tricks for success, I guess? I mean, I imagine sometimes you go out to an install and they want what they want and they want it done, but it doesn't really seem to me that that's your bread and butter. It doesn't seem like that's not the value that you provide.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I kind of guess it depends on the customer. Like if I'm working with an HOA, I try to identify the board member, and oftentimes it's landscapers hate the retired engineer that's on the board because those are the guys that know everything. But if you can develop a partnership with that specific individual, oftentimes you'll find that that retired individual will actually gain interest in the project. And like there truly can be a partnership between that individual. On municipal sites, or even commercial sites, you might have a client that you have to understand people are busy, and after a few emails you start to realize that this person could really care less about the details, and they have complete trust in you. And regardless of what you do, you always want to communicate, this is what I'm going to do it, and then follow up with that communication afterwards. And that's all they want to know. But then you have other customers that may be really inquisitive and really sharp. And those are the clients that I like to work with because they're very interested, and they'll start to understand flow. And they realize that, hey, you as a contractor, you're providing me recommendations, but they're taking ownership of those sites. So it really varies, but I think developing that relationship with the customer is just as important as the work you provide and the work you execute.
Yeah, absolutely. Communication is key always, right? That seems always comes down to that. So great answer. Okay, I'm going to get to Scott's questions now. So Scott asks, are contractors doing catch can tests and audits to add the efficiency coefficient to scheduling and smart control capability, or just using average flow data as the baseline? So that's Scott's question. Thank you for that, Scott.
Yeah, that that's a really great question, Scott. So in California, there's the Model Water Efficient Ordinance where an audit has to be completed. There's also other parts, other requirements in that ordinance. And one of the things that we're starting to see is there's a lot of drip going into sites. I want to say I've audited 3 sites in July, and there was not a single spray head on those sites. So doing a catch can test, if a site does come up, what we're going to see is a site that has spray heads, and you're going to see those spray heads are going to have rotating nozzles. So in those situations, we know the precip rate is going to be relatively low, but we still do an audit. There are some minimum requirements that the ordinance requires. Overhead irrigation has to have they call it an efficiency, it's distribution uniformity, efficiency of 0.75. So 0.75 with rotating nozzles on pressure regulated heads is relatively easy to achieve. But I guess getting back to the question is, unfortunately, a catch can test is very time consuming. Catch can test is going to provide you the DU and the precip rate, which are super important when programming a smart controller. But unfortunately, I just think a lot of contractors don't have the bandwidth to do a catch can test on every zone. What they'll do is they'll pick a representative zone, do an audit on that site, and try to use that data as a reference point to go ahead and program the other zones on that smart controller. But that's a really good question. California is definitely following the path of other states like not other states, but other regions like Southern Nevada and Arizona that are very drip heavy, just because water is becoming a tighter and tighter issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Great answer. And thank you again, Scott, for that question. So another question that I have for you, Eric, I would love to know, kind of obviously, we talked before the call, you're in Northern California. So and regionally it varies from state to state and region to region in terms of when people can actually be out in the field. Some, obviously in the colder months, some folks aren't able to get out in the field too much. So I'd just be curious, do you have any recommendations for professional development? I know you mentioned you have all of the Irrigation Association letters after your after your name. So I know you obviously believe in the power of certification, but what tools and resources do you recommend for irrigators to develop themselves professionally?
Um, so when I started my education, the IA didn't have a lot of classes that catered to preparing for certification. Basically, you got a list of books and you had to read through those books. Um, I know having people read through books, it's very time consuming, but it, it's super amazing the amount of information. Fortunately, there's a lot of information and some of it's bad, but most manufacturers just have some, if you try to avoid I guess, the DIY videos like on YouTube, and it just seems like more and more manufacturers have their um, training videos, both posted on their own proprietary website and on YouTube. And just from my perspective, when I see contractors in the field trying to gain knowledge, um, it just seems like there's less and less contractors that'll sit down and read a book at night. We're just kind of in this day and age where if somebody needs a piece of information, they need it now and they need it fast, and they'll scroll and they'll search. So I strongly encourage manufacturers to try to keep videos short and brief and have those posted where they're easily accessible on YouTube and can be found by key search words. But for anybody that's going to pursue the certification, and this is really why, to me, when I see somebody on a resume has something like a water auditor certification or a CIT certification, is the IA Cert Board does an amazing job of putting together some rigorous tests. So definitely encourage people, get the books that they recommend, and don't expect to have answers to all the exam questions in those books. There's going to be a lot of other research and knowledge that you're going to need to know if you really want to ace those exams. And that's really why, from my perspective, those certifications hold so much credibility. But having those certifications to me are kind of the base level. If somebody comes and they have those certifications, then I know, hey, yeah, this person has a good solid understanding of the basics. There's always going to be, especially when it comes to smart controllers, I tell people not every system's the same. Every manufacturer has unique algorithms, and and their scheduling engines work in very different ways. The basic principles are going to be there, but where you have to go to click to run reports or do different settings um, are going to be in different places. So definitely take advantage of manufacturer and distributor trainings as well. Um, and for me, networking is a really big part. I try to network with the Irrigation Association, but here locally, I have my state, it's the California Landscape Contractors Association. I try to attend as many of those events so I can network with manufacturer reps whenever possible.
Yeah, it's a great answer, and thanks for that. And I've heard I've never heard anyone say any of the tests are easy, any of the certification exams are easy. So I think there is some weight, and there's certainly something to be said about that. So it's a great answer. Okay, well, Eric, I've got one final question for you. It's really simple. So what's one thing every contractor should be doing but isn't?
Oh, I thought you said that was an easy question. That is a hard question. Boy, there's like 10 things that come to mind. Well, I'm going to try to keep it to one thing, but it's actually two things. Um, Site mapping. So it still amazes me, I've been in this industry for 30 years, how I'll go to a property and I'll talk to a contractor that's managing water, and I ask, um, okay, so where are your site maps? Oh, we don't have site maps. Okay, do you have a list of what's on each zone? No, no, we don't have a list. Like, who's programming this controller? Like, oh, Victor's programming the controller. It's like, well, how does Victor know what's on each station? I go, no, we just assume that he memorizes the site. But site mapping is just extremely valuable, and it just helps everybody manage water better, especially now that we have two-wire controllers. You have two-wire controllers and you have like 120 valves on a clock. It's so hard to keep all that straight without having documentation and a map. But as part of that, I do think the industry is going down this path of moving towards water budgeting. At least we're hearing more and more talk about water budgeting in the West. So having that map as a basis to develop a water budget, and I try not to promote like too many products, but there was a product at the IA show a couple years ago. I think it was the first year I came across, and I'm not sure if it won product of the year or not, but it was a device that you walk around your zone and it gives you the square footage of your area. For me, if there's one single product or something that a contractor should be doing, it's accurately measuring the area that you're irrigating and just having a good knowledge. You can use Google Earth. Google Earth may not take into account slope, but for me, that measuring device that I came across at the IA show and the new product contest was just a huge game changer. And every time I talk to another contractor, I ask them, hey, are you using this device? If not, hey, you really need to learn about it, because gosh, I probably use that device once a week, and it's super fast and really easy. And gosh, if it wasn't for attending the IA show's new product contest, I probably would have heard of it. So.
Gosh, and you're plugging the show. I mean, you're the man. We love it.
Yeah, that show, I know it's hard to get to. Sometimes it's earlier in the season when we're winterizing, but boy, it's just I've missed one ice show in my career, and it just every year, I might go into it thinking, oh, I'm probably not gonna. I haven't heard of any new products this year. I mean, every year I walk away with just something extremely valuable. So there have been times where I've been able to attend 4 or 5 days. There have been other times where I've only been able to attend one day, but it's definitely something that I make time in my schedule and try to do my best to attend. So.
Well, thank you. And we certainly appreciate that. And we certainly value the opportunity to have the gathering, right? To be able to um, bring so many dedicated irrigation professionals to one place. So I dropped in the chat. Our registration's open for our show. We're looking forward to seeing everyone in New Orleans here in just a couple months. Gosh, it's almost August, so we'll see everyone in December. We did get one more question, and I'm gonna fling it to you because we've got a couple minutes here. So Rick asks, following up on your answer regarding the measurement and using that product. What are you doing with the measurement numbers? How are you using them
Oh,
to develop
yeah.
your site plan and all the other things?
Yeah, good question. I forgot to mention that. I do take it a step further. I'll take that number and I share it with the client, and I let them know how many dollars roughly that zone is expected to spend on water per year. And for clients, that's a huge eye opener. And maybe I'm just thinking that way because California is trending towards this non-functional turf um, ban. But it's pretty amazing when a customer can look at an area, look at a lawn area, and know what that costs to irrigate each year. So we just take the square footage and we take historical ET for that specific area, and then we apply the water rate. And water rates vary because you have like meter fees into it, but as long as you're transparent with your customer how you came to that data, it's very eye-opening. And it's really awesome to be in an HOA board meeting and you hear a board member say, hey, you know that turf in the back 40, that cost us $300 to irrigate a month. And it really changes people's perspective. And I always think, the one thing I wish controllers would do, when you go to the gas station and you fill up, nobody really looks at the number of gallons going into the tank. They're really focused on the dollar. So maybe someday, if there's a manufacturer out there, develop a flow sensor that doesn't show gallons, but actually shows dollars that were spent on that specific zone. I think that would really be a game changer.
Well, I'm sure we have some product managers on the call today, so hopefully hopefully their ears are burning and they're listening, and we'll take that to heart. So again, Eric, really just want to take the time to thank you for joining us today, and obviously taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you're busy. As Eric mentioned at the top of the call, this webinar has been worth one CEU for the IA. So just remind everyone to retain your registration confirmation email in case you get audited for our CEUs. And with that, if there are any follow-up questions, I can go ahead and drop my email in the chat here, and I'm sure Eric would be happy to answer questions, and I will be happy to connect everyone. So again, thank you, Eric, and thank you everyone for joining us. And with that, we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you to the IA. Thanks, Luke.
Thanks. Bye-bye.